Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and we will be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Tzadik Beis Amud Aleph. We're continuing to learn halachos krias. We pick up on the top of Tzadik Beis Amud Aleph, Siman Nun Tes Sif Beis. Now, we began Siman Nun Tes in the previous year, and we're learning the halachos of birchas krias, specifically the halachos that pertain to the first of the birchas krias shacharis, the berachah arichta, the long berachah that begins with Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer varichas oiseh shalom uvarei hakoil. That's the psicha, that's the opening of this long bracha. The chasima of the bracha is at the end of the paragraph of Lakel Baruch Ni'imais Yitenu with the words Baruch Hashem yotzer ha'ma'oros. So that is one long bracha arichta. Now, the bulk of today's share is going to be taken up here on Tzadik Beis Amud Aleph with Sif Beis. Sif Beis is a little bit complex. We'll try to break it down into bite-sized pieces, so I'm going to give a little bit of a hakdama. In Sif Beis, the Mechaber concerns himself with mistakes that a person may make when saying the first bracha of birchas krias shacharis, and when you're yotzer and when you're not yotzer, depending on the exact mistake the person made. And the type of mistake that the Mechaber is dealing with is somebody who's sitting down to say birchas krias, and accidentally he falls into reciting birchas krias shel arvis, the bracha of Ma'ariv, instead of the bracha of shacharis. So the bracha of Ma'ariv, the first bracha of birchas krias, is Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher b'dvaroi ma'ariv aravim. So this person, and we're going to discuss 5 different specific mistakes, but this person, in some way or another, instead of saying the appropriate bracha of krias shel shacharis, he slipped into saying the bracha of krias shel arvis. And depending on the mistake, is he yotzer or is he not? Now, the first case that the Mechaber is going to discuss is a relatively simple case. We're going to talk about the person who sat down. He heard Baruch Hu, and now he sits down, and he's supposed to say, Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer varichas shalom uvarei hakoil. Instead, he goofs, and he says, Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher b'dvaroi ma'ariv aravim. He begins the first bracha of birchas krias, but then he realizes that he made a mistake. So quickly, he realizes that he made a mistake, and he says, Asher b'dvar ma'ariv aravim, yotzer varichas oiseh shalom uvarei hakoil. So, what's his mistake? His mistake is he inserted the words Asher b'dvaroi ma'ariv aravim. And then instantly he realized his mistake. He corrected himself. He said, yotzer varichas, and then from there on, he said everything exactly the way he's supposed to say it, including the chasima of the bracha, Baruch Hashem yotzer ha'ma'oros. So, the problematic thing that he said are the words Asher b'dvaroi ma'ariv aravim. Okay. In that case, the Mechaber is going to say that if he was nizkar miyad, if he realized right away his mistake, and he corrected his mistake, then the Mechaber is going to say that he's yotzer. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain what does it mean that he corrected his mistake right away. So we all know that when we're talking about dibur, when we're talking about speech, words that we have to say in birchas or anything else, we always use the time period of toich kedei dibur. If you make a correction, toich kedei dibur, we consider that to be an effective and a valid correction. How much time is toich kedei dibur? The amount of time it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umayri. Now, based on that, what the Mechaber seems to be saying is, the person said, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher b'dvaroi ma'ariv aravim. Now, toich kedei dibur of saying Asher b'dvaroi ma'ariv aravim, he corrects himself and he says yotzer varichas oiseh shalom uvarei hakoil. The Mechaber is going to say he's yotzer. since you did it, toich kidei dibur, everything is okay, and you're yotzer. Okay, that's the halacha that the Mechaber says. That is the way the Mishnah Berurah explains it. He says you're yotzer. Now, what if you didn't correct yourself, toich kidei dibur? So in that case, what happened? Well, the person said, berachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher b'dvarei ma'arav aravim, b'chachma pesach sha'arim, u'b'svuna mishani itim, u'machalef es hazmanim. And now he wakes up. Oi, what am I doing? I'm davening ma'ariv. What's the matter with me? And now he says, yotzer arav arichayshech. Well, now it's already not toich kidei dibur of asher b'dvarei ma'arav aravim. Now you inserted a lot more words. You're no longer toich kidei dibur of the mistake. You're no longer toich kidei dibur of asher b'dvarei ma'arav aravim. In that case, the Mechaber is going to say, then your correction is not effective. Now you're not yotzer. Now, why aren't you yotzer? Okay, well, the reason you're not yotzer is because in order for the berachah of yotzer or to be valid, it needs a valid psicha, it needs a valid opening, and it needs a valid chasima. It needs a proper closure. Now, in this case, if you said berachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher b'dvarei ma'arav aravim, u'b'chachma pesach sha'arim, u'b'svuna mishani itim, u'machalef es hazmanim, u'mesader es hakechavim, right? Your psicha is a psicha of ma'ariv. Now you go ahead and you correct yourself and you say yotzer arav arichayshech. It's too late. The psicha is gone. You're too far removed from the psicha. What's the psicha? The psicha really, berachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, the shema malchus. You're already too far removed from the psicha to be able to repair it. And therefore, I don't care that now you switched to the krias shacharis, and now you say yotzer arav arichayshech. Your bracha doesn't have a psicha. And since your bracha doesn't have a psicha, it's not valid. That's what you get from a simple reading of the Mechaber, a basic reading of the Mishnah Berurah. Now, in the Bir Halacha, the Chavetz Chaim points out that there seems to be a very strong kasha on this. What's the kasha? We said, what is the length of time of toich kidei dibur? The length of time of toich kidei dibur is the time it takes to say 4 words. Shalom, Alecha, Rabbi, Umari. Okay, that's toich kidei dibur. The Mechaber says, you have to make your correction toich kidei dibur of saying asher b'dvarei ma'arav aravim. Okay, if you correct yourself toich kidei dibur of the word aravim, then your correction is a valid correction. It's effective, and your birchas krias is a good birchas krias. Asks the Bir Halacha, this doesn't make any sense. The whole point of the correction is so that you should have a valid psicha to the bracha. Now, the ikar of the psicha, the main part of the psicha of the bracha, is the shema malchus. Baruch Hashem Elokeinu, that's the shem, and malchus melech haolam. So really, you need to make the correction toich kidei dibur of haolam, not of aravim, right? What you really want to do is, you want to say, Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Now you have a mistake, asher b'dvarei ma'arav aravim. Now you want to correct yourself, toich kidei dibur of the word haolam, so that you could delete the mistake, take out asher b'dvarei ma'arav aravim, and backspace, and link your correction of yotzer arav arichayshech to the words Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. So now you have a valid psicha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer arav arichayshech. So it would seem that the critical gap in time should be between the word haolam and yotzer ar. If you say yotzer ar within toich kidei dibur of saying haolam, then we could take out the words that you said by mistake in middle, we could delete them, and we could hit backspace, and we could pull back yotzer arav arichayshech, and link it to the psicha of Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, and you have a valid bracha. But if there's more than toich kidei dibur between haolam and yotzer ar, so then it's very nice that you'll delete the mistaken words that you said, but you still cannot forge a connection between Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam and yotzer ar. Now, being that this is the case, asks the Bir Halacha, how could the Mechaber say that the critical question is, did you say yotzer within Toich Kidei Dibur of Aravim? Once you said Asher Bidvaroi Ma'ariv Aravim, you are already 4 words removed from Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. Right? You said Asher Bidvaroi Ma'ariv Aravim. That's 4 words. Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umayri. 4 words. So if you said Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Bidvaroi Ma'ariv Aravim, and you correct yourself and you say yotzer, you are already Toich Kidei Dibur removed from Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. So how does it help that you now corrected yourself? How does that make you be yotzer? That's the kasha that the Chavetz Chaim asks the Bir Halacha. And for the Bir Halacha, an interesting chiddush. The Bir Halacha says the words Asher B'Dvaroi Ma'ariv Aravim, we don't have to remove all 4 of those words. We only have to remove 2. Asher B'Dvaroi is not problematic. Ma'ariv Aravim is problematic. Therefore, if you correct yourself within Toich Kidei Dibur of saying Ma'ariv Aravim, what we're going to do is we're going to take yotzer, we're going to connect it to Asher B'Dvaroi. So it's not that you have to be Toich Kidei Dibur from Ha'olam. No, you have to be Toich Kidei Dibur of Asher B'Dvaroi, because Asher B'Dvaroi makes sense. The bracha will be like this: Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. Gebenched is the Eibishter Melech Haolam. Asher B'Dvaroi, who with his words yotzer oir v'arichashech, created or and created dark. That's a valid bracha. Basar mamoris divrei olam. The world was created with mamoris of the Ribbono Shel Olam. So there's nothing wrong with saying Asher B'Dvaroi yotzer or. Now, it's a little bit funny because a simple reading of the Shulchan Aruch would seem to yield that you need Toich Kidei Dibur of the word Aravim, and now we're saying that you need Toich Kidei Dibur of the word B'Dvaroi. But, says the Bir Halacha, that has to be pshat in the first case of the Mechaber, so that the first case of the Mechaber is, and we're going to see this, the sheet of the Mechaber. There are those who are chaylik on the Mechaber, and the Mishnah Berurah seems to want to be chaylik on the Mechaber halacha l'maisa. But in the world of the Mechaber, the first case is a person said Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher B'Dvaroi Ma'ariv Aravim. If he corrected himself Toich Kidei Dibur of the word B'Dvaroi, and he picked up with yotzer or v'arichashech, and then he said everything properly through to the end of yotzer ha'ma'oros, he's yotzer, because we take out the words Ma'ariv Aravim, and we have him saying Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher B'Dvaroi yotzer or v'arichashech Oiseh Shalom u'varayas hakoil, which is a valid bracha, and he's yotzer birchas krias. So this is case number 1 of the Mechaber over here in Sif Beis. Let's see it inside. Top line, Tzadik Beis Amud Aleph, says the Mechaber. Im tov Amar Asher B'Dvaroi Ma'ariv Aravim. Somebody said Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher B'Dvaroi Ma'ariv Aravim. V'nizkar miyad, and he immediately realizes his mistake. Toich Kidei Dibur. V'amar yotzer or. So now he corrects himself and he picks up yotzer or v'arichashech Oiseh Shalom u'varayas hakoil. V'gam siyem yotzer ha'ma'oros. And then he has a proper chasima at the end of Lakel Baruch Ni'imos Yitenu of yotzer ha'ma'oros. Yotzer, he's yotzer. That's case number 1 in the Mechaber. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cotton base. Miyad. What does it mean that he corrected himself immediately? Dafka miyad. It has to be that he corrected himself immediately. Dahainu, which means, says the Chavetz Chaim, b'toich kidei dibur. He has to have a correction within the time span of toich kidei dibur, the amount of time it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umayri. And we're explaining now, al pi the Bir Halacha, that it means within toich kidei dibur of the word B'Dvaroi. Aval la'achar kidei dibur. But if too much time passes before he corrects himself, lo yotzer, he's not yotzer. Why? The loikai habracha shapasach Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, because now we lose the connection between the ikr psicha of the bracha, the shema malchus, al mashachazav amar yotzer. It's very nice that 3 minutes later he's saying yotzer berachah shacharis shalom avarei. But it's no longer connected to the shema malchus of barachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. So it's not a valid bracha. Kevin shaloi amaroi miyad, since he didn't say it right away. Okay. Now, I'm going to read the next words of the Mishnah Berurah, even though we didn't see the next words of the Mechaber yet. In the next case of the Mechaber, is going to be a case where the person started off Mariv Aravim, and he never realized his mistake. He said, Hashem Advar Mariv Aravim, B'chach Babis and Sharim, and he never says, but then somehow at the end he catches himself and he says Baruch Hashem yotzer ha'ma'oros. In that case, the Mechaber is going to say you're not yotzer because you don't have a psicha. Your whole psicha is the davening of Ma'ariv. You never had a psicha of yotzer. So now the Mishnah Berurah just points out that he says like this: Umashakasav achakach v'loy amar yotzer oyer. This that the Mechaber is going to say in his second case. His second case is going to be where a person made a mistake and he said Hashem Dvarai Mariv Aravim, and he never says Yotzer Or. Really points out the Chavetz Chaim, the Mechaber could have said a bigger chiddush. Hu hadin, the same halacha is true im amoroi. If the person did eventually say Yotzer Or, just v'loy miyad, he didn't do it toich k'dei dibur. Kein kasav a pri begad b'shem b'achvar prisha. So again, what's the Chavetz Chaim saying? Chavetz Chaim is saying like this: the first case of the Mechaber, the reason why you're not yotzer is because you said the reason you're yotzer. The first case of the Mechaber, the reason you're yotzer is because you corrected yourself toich k'dei dibur. So since you said Hashem Dvarei Mariv Aravim, but then you corrected yourself toich k'dei dibur, and you said yotzer or varechayshech. So now your yotzer or berachah is connected to the psicha. It's connected to barachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shema malchus. So you have a valid psicha, and then you had a chesima of yotzer ha'ma'oros. So everything is fine and dandy, and you're yotzer. But if you would have said barachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Hashem Dvar Mariv Aravim, b'chach b'peisach sharmu, b'svunim v'shanitim, v'machlev v'sazmanim, v'sadus v'kechavim, etc., 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 and then corrected yourself, Yotzer or Varechayshech, then you would not be Yotzer. Why? Because it's very nice that eventually you got around to saying Yotzer or Varechayshech. But there's no connection to the psicha of Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, because there's more than Toich K'dei Dibur over there. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, really that could have been the Mechaber's second case. The Mechaber's second case could have been you took too long to correct yourself. So even though you corrected yourself, it's invalid. But that's not the second case that the Mechaber gives. The second case that the Mechaber gives is you didn't correct yourself. You never got around to correcting yourself. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he didn't have to say that. He could have said you did correct yourself, just you corrected yourself too late. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. Okay, now let's go weiter in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, this so far is the sheet of the Mechaber. Avol, b'derech hachayim paisik, the derech hachayim paskins. Da afilu im loy nizkar ad karoiv l'soif habracha. Even if you didn't catch your mistake, almost to the end of the bracha. Mikamakayim, kevan shaloi gamar oisa, since you did not yet finish the bracha with yotzer ha'ma'oros, ein tzarich lahaskil meroish birchas yotzer ar mechadosh. You don't have to start the bracha over again. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Rak yoymar yotzer oyer v'arichayshach ad soif berachas yotzer ha'ma'oros v'yotzer bazeh. The Derech Chaim completely disagrees with this. The Mechaber said you must correct yourself within toich k'dei dibur of at least the words Asher b'dvaroi, so that you could take your yotzer or and link it back to the shema malchus of Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Says the Derech Chaim, no. You said Hashem b'dvar Mariv Aravim and b'chach b'peisach sharim and b'svunim v'shanitim and b'machlev v'sazmanim. You're 20 words removed from Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Now you recognize your mistake? No problem. Switch it to shacharis mode. Start saying yotzer and as long as you have a good chasima of berachah Hashem yotzer ma'oros, you're good. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, he brings down the Derech and says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein yesh linoig lamaisa. This is what we should do, halacha lamaisa. K'moishe kasavdu b'bir halacha, like I write in the bir halacha dibur hamaskil v'nizkar. Now I'm not going to go through this bir halacha inside because it's a very lengthy bir halacha, but I'll explain it to you outside. I already told you the beginning, the first half of the bir halacha that explained the sheet of the mechaber. How does he explain the sheet of the Derech Chaim? What does the Derech Chaim do with the mechaber? The mechaber says, in order to have a valid bracha, you must have a link to the shema malchus. Barachat Hashem l'kedem alach haolam. If this person said Barachat Hashem l'kedem alach haolam, Hashem b'dvaray mar v'ravim b'chakma b'zeh shurim v'svudim shaditim v'achim v'zazmanim v'mosados gechavim, etc., 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 etc. So it's very nice that now he says yotzer or varecheshech. How is it connected to shema malchus? How do you have a bracha? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, beautiful. Chavetz Chaim explains, he says, you have to understand. We discussed this in the previous year. Why do we say by shacharis, yotzer oyer uvoirei choshech? Why are we talking about choshech? And by Ma'ariv, why do we talk by Ma'ariv about or? By Ma'ariv, we talk about or also. We say, B'chachma peiseach sha'arim, he opens up the gates for the sunlight. And we say, Boirei yoim v'layla. Why do we talk about yoim by Ma'ariv? Umari yoim umevi loyla. Mavdil ben yoim uvela. Why are we talking about yoim? Why do we talk about or and yoim at night? And why do we talk about layla by day? The answer is because the Gemara in Berachas tells us that we have a chiyuv to be mazkir midas yoim balayla. We have to thank the Rabbeinu Shalom for oyer and for yoim at night, or midas layla bayoim. And we have to thank the Rabbeinu Shalom for midas layla bayoim. If so, says the Chavetz Chaim in the Bir Halacha, ki ka'amar bracha umalchus. So when you said Barachat Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, even if you were planning on saying Asher b'dvaray mar v'aravim, me'ikara atarvayu kamar, you always were planning on talking about both Or and Laila, because both by shacharis and by Ma'ariv, we're always mazkir Yom and Laila. So says the Bir Halacha, there's no need for Toich K'dei Dibur. You don't need to link the yotzer or to the shema malchus of Barachat Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. The only time that would be an issue would be if the intervening words were inappropriate. So if you say Barachat Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam and you start going into a whole series of totally inappropriate words that have no belonging here, so then we have to be able to delete those words. And we need less than Toich K'dei Dibur so we could forge a connection between the Shema Malchus and the right words of Yotzer or Varecheshech. But Asher b'dvaray mar v'aravim is not inappropriate because we're always maskir midas layla b'yoim. So okay, so you're going overboard. Instead of just saying Yotzer or Varecheshech, you're launching into a whole Hashem b'dvaray mar v'aravim, chachma b'zeh sharim, v'svudim shaditim, achal v'zazmanim, v'sados gechavim. So you're going overboard with your midas layla b'yoim. But so what? The Shema Malchus clearly is going on Yom and Laila. The Shema Malchus is going to cover the Yotzer Or eventually when you get to it. Therefore, says the Derech Chaim, I don't need Toich K'dei Dibur of Barachat Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. I don't need Toich K'dei Dibur from Asher b'dvaray. As long as I eventually get around to saying the words Yotzer Or Varecheshech, I'm going to have my birchas krias shacharis. And the Shema Malchus was said al das Yom and Laila. So it's not a problem. Beautiful Bir Halacha. And again, the Mishnah Berurah said, "V'chein yesh linig lamaisa k'mosh kesavdu b'bir halacha." Okay, so that was the Mechaber's first case, and really, that is really the complication of today's daf. The rest is relatively simple. Let's continue now with the Mechaber into the second case. So again, the first case was, person said, and then immediately he corrected himself, yotzer, and then he continued davening shacharis straight through to yotzer ha'ma'oros, yotzer. Aval, however, says the Mechaber, im amar b'dvarai ma'ar v'aravim, v'loy amar yotzer oyer. But what happens if the person says ma'ar v'aravim, and he says the whole bracha of ma'ar v'aravim, and he never corrects himself, and he never says yotzer oyer v'arichoshech, and it's not until he gets up to the chasima, eventually he says barachah Hashem yotzer ha'ma'oros. So now he has a chasima of shacharis, but he never had a psicha of shacharis. That's case number 2. Case number 3. Oy loy siyem yotzer ha'ma'oros. Or what if this person messes up the chasima of the bracha? Maybe he messes up both. Maybe he messes up the psicha, and he never gets around to fixing the psicha, and then he says the chasima wrong also. He says barachah Hashem, amar v'aravim. Or maybe eventually he does fix up the psicha. Maybe he even fixes up the psicha toch kidei dibur. Maybe he says barachah Hashem l'kedim alachaylam Hashem b'dvarim amar v'aravim. Oh, yotzer v'arichoshech shalom v'aris hakoil. And then he goes all the way through the paragraph of Lekel Baruch Nimois Yitenu, and then he gets to the end and he says barachah Hashem amar v'aravim. Falls back into Ma'ariv. So case number 3, he messes up the psicha. In these cases, in case number 2 and case number 3, says the Mechaber, lo yotzer. In those 2 cases, you're not yotzer. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cut and Gimel, v'loy amar. Case number 2 was, he said, asher b'dvarai ma'ar v'aravim, v'loy amar yotzer or. And he never corrects himself. He never says yotzer or v'arichoshech. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Pirush, Alpha Pisha Siem Barachah Hashem Yotzer ha'ma'oros. Case number 2 is where he messes up the psicha and he says Hashem b'dvarim ma'ar v'aravim, and he never corrects himself to say yotzer or v'arichoshech, but eventually when he gets up to the end of Lekel Baruch Nimois Yitenu, he's Messiah properly, and he's Messiah Barachah Hashem Yotzer ha'ma'oros. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, Kevan Chetchilasoi, since the beginning of the bracha, ve'emtsa'oi, and the middle of the bracha, meaning that he never corrected himself, shaloi kedin, was improper, lo yotzer, because he doesn't have a psicha. V'tzarch lachzor l'roish, and he has to go back to the beginning of birchas krias, barachah Hashem l'kedem alachaylam, kaseder, and say it in the normal way, arachar yotzer ha'ma'oros, v'ayin b'bir halach. Okay. Weiter. Next case. Now we're up to case number 4 in the Mechaber, which is 3 lines down the middle of the line, V'im Amar. V'im Amar yotzer or v'arichoshech. What if he starts properly? He says, barachah Hashem l'kedim alachaylam yotzer or v'arichoshech, and then he slips into Ma'ariv. Asher b'dvarai ma'ar v'aravim, v'gam siyei ma'ar v'aravim. And then he ends off barachah Hashem ma'ar v'aravim instead of yotzer ha'ma'oros. So in this case, he has a valid psicha. Barachah Hashem l'kedem alachaylam yotzer or v'arichoshech, right? And then he says Asher b'dvarai ma'ar v'aravim. So his psicha is okay. But then he falls into Ma'ariv, and his chasima is barachah Hashem ma'ar v'aravim. Lo yotzer. He's not yotzer. Okay, there's no Mishnah Berurah on that. Now we go, so far we had 4 cases from the Mechaber. We have 1 case yet from the Mechaber. This could be the end of the Sif. But first we have a case now of the Ramah. Says the Ramah Hagah, V'hu adin im loy amar tchila rak yotzer or. The same thing says the Ramah. The Ramah points out that In the mechaber's case, what the person did was he had a good psicha because he said yotzer oyer varei chayshech. Then he slipped it to Marav and he said Asher b'dvar Marav Aravim, and then at the end he was Messiah Baruch Hashem Marav Aravim. Says the Ramah, you could make that case simpler. You could say a case that the person had a good psicha, yotzer oyer varei chayshech, and he never said Asher b'dvar Marav Aravim. He said, Baruch Hashem Elkeinu melech haolam yotzer oyer chayshech shalom uvaris hakoil. Hamer Lawrence Feldam berachah v'tum b'chet b'chet b'tam nasi b'reishis v'chulei 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 v'chulei, all the way through Lekel Baruch Nimai Sitenu, and then at the end he said Baruch Hashem Amar Varovim. The point is that even though he has a valid psicha, he doesn't have a valid chasima. That's the point. In the Mechaber's case, he has a valid psicha, and then in the middle he switches into Asher b'dvar Amar Varovim, and then he has an invalid chasima of yotzer ha'ma'oros, and the Mechaber says you're not yotzer. Says the Ramah, you're also not yotzer, even if you didn't say Asher b'dvar Amar Varovim. Even if the whole psicha and the whole middle was okay, if you're a Messiah Baruch Hashem Amar Varovim, so you screwed up the chasima, you're also not yotzer. Says the Ramah Hagah, for who adinim lo yomar tchila rak yotzer. Even if the whole beginning and the whole middle was shacharis, if all the way at the end of Lekel Baruch, you say Baruch Hashem Amar Varovim lo yotzer, and it's divrei atzma, he says it on his own. There's no grace of chiddush over here. I think the Ramah is like wondering a little bit on the Mechaber. Why did the Mechaber choose to say a case where in the middle you inserted Asher b'dvar Amar Varovim? It's not negeya. Even if you didn't insert Asher b'dvar Amar Varovim in the middle, as long as you were Messiah Amar Varovim, you're not yotzer. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and daled. V'huadin, and says the Chavetz Chaim, Kulei alma sovereign kain. Everybody agrees to this Ramah. Kimavur b'veis Yosef. Chasima b'vadai tzricha liyos kedin. You definitely have to have an appropriate chasima of yotzer ha'ma'oros. So nobody argues on what the Ramah says. Umad nokat ha'shulchan aruch b'tchila oy loy siem yotzer ha'ma'oros. Ein kavanasoi dafka ba'ofen shetav amar mitchila asher b'dvarei ma'ar v'rovim. When the Mechaber said his third case, in the Mechaber's third case, the person said, but he started off asher b'dvarei ma'ar v'rovim. He never corrected himself, and then the Mechaber said, or another case, oy loy siem yotzer ha'ma'oros. Don't think. Says the Mishnah Berurah, don't think that what the Mechaber meant over there, Ein kavanasai dafka ba'ofen shetav amar b'tchila asher b'dvarim ma'ar v'rovim. In case number 3 of the Mechaber, which are the words oy loy siem yotzer ha'ma'oros, that case is not only if both the psicha and the chasima were messed up. That case is even if the psicha was good and the chasima was no good. You're also not yotzer. So why did he say it? Oy loy siem yotzer ha'ma'oros. Rak nakte l'siyuma milsa dereisha. All he was doing was closing out all the possibilities of the beginning. In other words, in the beginning, the Mishnah Berurah said the person started off Asher b'dvar Amar Varovim. He corrected himself to yotzer or, and then he had a good chasima. In that case, you're yotzer. Then he went to case number 2, which is he didn't correct himself. So you're also not yotzer. Says case number 3 in the Mechaber, you're also not yotzer if you started off wrong and then you corrected yourself, but you had a bad chasima. So all he's pointing out to Chavetz Chaim is that even the Mechaber agrees that even if everything else is okay and the only thing you messed up is the chasima, the Mechaber agrees with the Ramah that you're not yotzer. So this Ramah is not being cholik on the Mechaber. The Mechaber also agrees to that. V'gam ad nokat v'im ama yotzer or v'arechayshach asher b'dvarim ma'ar v'rovim hu mishum d'ratzal l'sayim b'seifa d'im siyem yotzer ha'oros yotzer afu b'shehifsik b'ma'ar v'rovim kimavur b'beis Yosef. So too, says the Chavetz Chaim, when the Mechaber gives you a case that if your psicha was okay and you said yotzer or v'arechayshach and then you interjected in the middle with asher b'dvaroi ma'ariv aravim, but then you messed up the chasima, you're not yotzer, that's only because he wants to tell you that if your psicha was good and your chasima was good, your yotzer, even if in the middle you stuck in asher b'dvarei ma'ariv aravim. Okay, a little complex, but if you go through it slowly, it's okay. Eis kat hey, rak yotzer oyer. The Ramah says, if your whole psicha was okay, and the middle was okay, but you will see him, ma'ariv aravim, you're messed up, you're not yotzer. Rak yotzer or pirish, v'chol nusach shel berachah. If you said the entire nusach, from the beginning all the way to the end, you said the entire proper nusach of the berachah of shacharis, and just you messed up at the end, instead of saying berachah Hashem yotzer ba'oros, you said berachah Hashem ma'ariv aravim. So pirish v'chol nusach shel berachah, you said properly. Levad sheta b'chasima, you just messed up the end. Avapiken lo yotzer the haloi birch b'chasima ala'or hamaskil laha'ir b'yom zeh, because you didn't have a chasima of yotzer hama'oros, which is the berachah on today's light, which is the berachah that you're supposed to be saying in birchas krias. Ois cotton vav, if you were messiah ma'ariv aravim, you're not yotzer. But if you said everything right, and then you got all the way to the end, and you said berachah Hashem ma'ariv aravim, yotzer ma'oros, toich k'dei dibur, you're okay. Because since you did it toich k'dei dibur, we take out ma'ariv aravim, we put in yotzer ma'oros, it's linked to berachah Hashem, and you're okay. Eis cotton zayin lo yotzer. You messed up the chasima, you're not yotzer. This is an interesting halacha. So okay, so let's say you messed up in one of these ways that the Mechaber or the Ramah say you weren't yotzer. So you were a little bit fadrimmeled by shacharis. You said berachah Hashem yotzer. You went on, you said everything right, and then all the way at the end you said berachah Hashem ma'ariv aravim. Okay. You didn't catch your mistake right away, and you go Avarabba or Avasolam Aftanu Hashem Elokeinu, and you're in the middle of Avarabba, and suddenly you say, "Oy vey, what did I do? I said Baruch Hashem Amar Varavim at the end of Lakel Baruch Nimai Sitenu." And I remember from Dirshu, I remember from the Mechaber and from the Ramah that that's one of the cases where you're not yotzer. What do you do now? You're already holding in the second bracha of birchas krias. You're already holding an avarabba. What do you do now? Says the Mishnah Berurah, "Vim tava le'nizkar shehiskal avarabba lo yafsik beintayim." Don't be mafsik in the middle of the bracha of avarabba. Rak yisayim kisei de birchas avarabba. Finish off avarabba. Baruch atah Hashem abaycha b'ama Yisrael ba'ava. V'achar kach yom yotzer or kaid b'kriyas, and then go back. What's interesting about that is that the bracha of Avarabba is a bracha smucha lechaverta. The bracha of Avarabba doesn't have a psicha. So if you do this, I don't know how you ever had a psicha to the bracha of Avarabba. I'm not clear why the bracha of Avarabba was valid, right? Because you said the first bracha of Krias and you messed it up. You said Baruch Hashem Amar Varavim at the end. So the first bracha of Krias that you said is out the window. It's invalid. You said Avarabba, but you said Avarabba without a psicha. Because it's a bracha smucha l'chaverta, but now it's not a bracha smucha l'chaverta because we threw out the first bracha that you said. So that means that you made the bracha of Avarabba without a psicha. And yet the Mishnah Berurah is saying, okay, keep the bracha of Avarabba, and when you finish the bracha of Avarabba, say the bracha of berachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer berachah. So how is the bracha of Avarabba valid bracha? I don't have a good teretz to that kasha yet. I'm working on it, but I don't have a good teretz to that kasha yet. Okay. Now let's finish off the sif. Let's go to the fifth and final case of the Mechaber. So we're like a half a line before the end of the sif. We're 4 lines up from the bottom, almost at the middle of the line. Aval imsiem yotzer hama'oros. But if, and he's going back on his 4th case, and like the Mishnah Berurah explained, this is why the Mechaber designed his 4th case the way he did. The Mechaber's 4th case was, you had a good psicha. You said Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer or berachah. So you had a good psicha. Then you switched into Asher b'dvarai ma'ariv aravim. And in the fourth case, you are Messiah Baruch Atah Hashem Amarav Aravim, so you aren't yotzer. In the fifth case, the Mechaber says, you said Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer or berachah. Then you switched to Ma'ariv, you said Hashem b'dvarai ma'ariv aravim b'chachma b'seg sharim, etc., etc. But when you got up to the Chasima, you realized your mistake and you said Baruch Atah Hashem yotzer ha'ma'oros. So that's what the Mechaber is saying here. Avalim siyam yotzer ha'ma'oros, kevan shepasach yotzer or. Since you had a good psicha, you started off Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer or berachah, right? So you had a good psicha. Then you switched to Ma'ariv, but then you had a good Chasima, Baruch Atah Hashem yotzer ha'ma'oros. Says the Mechaber, yotzer, you yotzer, afalpi shehifsik b'ma'ariv aravim, even though you stuck the nusach of Ma'ariv in the middle. So again, the reason the Mechaber designed the fourth case the way he did, the fourth case, what happened was, the person said, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer or berachah. Then he switched it to Ma'ariv, Hashem b'dvarai ma'ariv aravim, and then he was chaysim with Ma'ariv, Baruch Atah Hashem ma'ariv aravim. The Mechaber said, you're not yotzer. Why? Because the Chasima was no good. The Mishnah Berurah pointed out that the Mechaber didn't have to design the case that way. He could have said that you said Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer or berachah, and you never switched it to Ma'ariv. You said the whole nusach of shacharis all the way to the end, and at the end you said Baruch Atah Hashem Amarav Aravim. You're not yotzer because you messed up the Chasima. So why did the Mechaber design the case that you switched into Asher b'dvarai ma'ariv aravim in the middle? To show you the chiddush of the last case. Because in the fifth case, you started off yotzer or berachah, then you switched it to ma'ariv Asher b'dvarai ma'ariv aravim, then at the end, you made the right chasima. You said Baruch Atah Hashem yotzer ha'ma'oros. Says the Mechaber, you yotzer, even though you stuck the nusach of Ma'ariv in the middle. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cotton ches yotzer, you're yotzer. Says the Mishnah Berurah, beautiful little ice cotton here of Mishnah Berurah. Tamtzis zeh hasifhu. The summary of this sif beis is the following. There are two aspects of the first berachah of birchas krias. Of the berachah of yotzer there are two critical aspects that if you're missing either one of them, you're not yotzer. What is that? Aleph, psichas habracha oy emtzeitza tzricha lios kedin. The beginning of the bracha has to be right. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer or berachah. Or the middle. What does the middle mean? The middle means that you corrected yourself miyad. You corrected yourself toch kedei dibur so that you still have a psicha. That's the first aspect that you need. The first aspect that you need is you need a valid psicha. Beis, the second aspect is chasima sabracha. You need a valid chasima of Baruch Atah Hashem yotzer ha'ma'oros. Vedan, you should know, says the Chavetz Chaim, the huadin berachas aravim the arvis. The same thing is true by Ma'ariv. Kimavur berachas yud beis aman aleph ayin sham. Ois cotton test. Your yotzer afal pi shehifsik b'ma'ariv aravim. Even though you stuck the nusach of the Ma'ariv bracha in between your psicha of shacharis and your chasima of shacharis, you're still yotzer. Toich kedei dibur shal psichas yotzer or. See, the Chavetz Chaim is pointing out that there is a chiddush here. The chiddush is, you might think, if somebody says, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer or berachah, and now toich kedei dibur, he says, Asher b'dvarai ma'ariv aravim, maybe we delete yotzer or berachah, and we backspace Asher b'dvarai ma'ariv aravim, and maybe we don't have a psicha of shacharis. Says Mishnah Berurah, no, that you don't do. So even though he was mafsik with ma'ariv aravim, toich kedei dibur shal psichas yotzer or, v'amar kol nusach da'arvis avada chasima, afal pikein lo yamrinan. We do not say shenekar al yedei zeh teves harishayim shel yotzer or. We don't say that we delete the words of yotzer or. Apparently we do that l'kula, but we not do that l'chumra. Okay. A little bit of a complex sif over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be making against krias or the Ram Shem should send. Yeshua for us paras should do them to all those in need. And we should be zeicher to see the BS girl tzedek. B'meher v'yameinu amen. Be well.